Hello and welcome. It's turning into a global economic powerhouse, but is India lagging behind when it comes to political influence around the world? India provides billions of dollars in aid to many African and Asian nations and is deeply involved in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. It also contributes thousands of soldiers to United Nations peacekeeping missions around the world, but the nation that is home to 16% of the world's population is still struggling to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's also been denied membership of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, despite having the third highest Muslim population in the world. India's watched China establish itself as a major global political force, while it remains mired in border disputes, internal unrest and corruption. Today we ask, how can India rise above such contradictions and assert itself on the world's political stage? Remember, you can join our conversation with your phone calls, and we also welcome your text messages and emails. Joining us from New Delhi is prominent Indian politician Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He's a member of India's lower house of parliament and a former federal minister of state for external affairs. He also had a long and accomplished career at the United Nations. Shashi Tharoor, I welcome you to the show.
Good to be with you again, Riz. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you. Now, there are a number of issues we're going to try to cover because there's a lot, actually, when it comes to India, of course. But let's start with India's national security concerns. And, of course, you know, neighboring Pakistan, it's been a rival in a number of senses. How do you see relations developing with Pakistan, especially considering the turmoil going on there now?
Well, we're very concerned about the turmoil within Pakistan. We certainly wish the authorities well in dealing with the extremism and fanaticism that has taken so many Pakistani lives. But equally, we wish the Pakistani authorities would see that the violence being inflicted upon India from Pakistani soil by terrorist groups and fanatic groups is really the other side of the same coin. And we would hope that Pakistan will make common cause with us in dealing with this sort of horrendous behavior. So far, we haven't had enough indication, I think, that that's happening. But undoubtedly, both Pakistan and India would benefit greatly from being able to deal effectively with the menace of extremism and indeed religious fundamentalism.
And of course, Afghanistan complicates the matter there, not only for Pakistan but for India. Could you see a situation where India and Pakistan essentially end up in a sort of proxy war within Afghanistan itself?
I would certainly hope not. First of all, India has no geopolitical objectives in Afghanistan. Our program there, our development aid program, is entirely geared towards social objectives. We've been helping the Afghan people with everything from reconstructing girls' schools, maternal and child health hospitals, building, in fact, roads and connecting power transmission lines. We're proud of the fact that Kabul has 24 hours of electricity today because Indian engineers were able to build a power transmission line at 3,000 meters height. So there's all of that going on, and we're in the process of building the Afghan parliament. We don't have a military program in Afghanistan, and we're not interested in getting involved on the military side of things. We believe what we're doing is helping the Afghan people develop the sorts of institutions they need to be a functioning, normal, and frankly, gender equal society. We hope that Pakistan will see these objectives as a good thing. But if Pakistan, of course, has a different perspective on this, then indeed the danger that you allude to is real. And we would really like to avoid that.
Of course, Dr. Tharoor, there's also the issue of Indians being there in Afghanistan when the US military presence departs. What do you predict might happen there? Is there a danger of Indians becoming targets in Afghanistan?
We already are targets, Riz. I'm sorry to say that our embassy has been attacked twice, and what is more, a residence in which Indians were staying was also attacked in Kabul, and we've lost several Indian lives. Every one of the attacks has taken a large number of Afghan lives as well, and they've all been traced, I'm sorry to say, to sources within Pakistan. So we are deeply, deeply regretful that there are people within Pakistan who believe that Indian interests in Afghanistan are legitimate targets, even though what they're doing is of essentially a social and humanitarian nature. So because we have been targeted, we're very conscious of the security threat. Right now, as I said, we have no security presence. We have left it to the international community other than us, not because we're unwilling to risk our lives, but simply because we know that a military presence by India would be seen askance by Pakistan and would needlessly complicate the genuine efforts of the international community to stabilize that country. We wish the democratically elected government of Afghanistan well, and we'd like to see that government flourish. So if we can't help militarily, we think that by helping in terms of all these other kinds of activities, we're helping shore up the institutions of democratic civil society.
Looking a little further afield, let me ask you about India balancing its increasing security ties with Israel and its traditional support for the Palestinians, and of course its trade and oil ties with the Middle East. How will India continue to balance this? Is there a danger of a conflict of interest arising?
I don't think so, Riz. I mean, certainly a number of other countries, including notably, of course, Egypt, Jordan and Turkey, all recognize the government of Israel without in any way diluting their commitment to the Palestinian cause. And India is no exception. When I was minister, I had the great honor of receiving and meeting with President Mahmoud Abbas. And I can assure you that our conversations certainly left no room for any doubt that India's commitment to the Palestinian cause, to a peaceful, independent, sovereign Palestine, is completely undiluted. But our view is we want to see a solution in which both Palestine and Israel live peacefully side by side in prosperity, in mutual prosperity. And we'd like to see that happen. So we don't see any contradiction between our commitment to Palestinian self-determination and at the same time our commitment to having the people of Israel, who have of course suffered a great deal, being able to enjoy their peace and security without in any way posing a threat to their Arab neighbors.
Let's get a call in here from Pakistan, actually, we have on the line. Zafar, what would you like to ask?
Hello, Riz, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Riz, thank you very much. I have a question from the gentleman. He just mentioned that in Afghanistan, India does not have any geopolitical objectives, whereas it is an open secret that there are a number of consulates which are working just along Pakistan border in all important cities of Afghanistan. And in those consulates and otherwise, it is known to all the world that Indian intelligence agency RAW, in cooperation and coordination with Afghanistan intelligence agency, they are doing everything possible to fuel what is happening in Pakistan. Even they have their bases in Afghanistan which have been identified, and where the Taliban, which are anti-Pakistan Taliban, they have been trained there.
Okay.
So I would like to ask this question from the gentleman, what he's saying about that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zafar. Dr. Tharoor.
Yes, well, I must say that I'm very sorry to hear this sort of paranoia coming out of our Pakistani listeners. The fact is that India does have consulates. What they do is issue visas to the large numbers of Afghans who regularly like to travel to India. We do not have any desire to destabilize Pakistan for two very simple reasons. First, we have no desire to covet anything in Pakistan. There is nothing Pakistan has that we want to wrest by force. And therefore, we have no interest whatsoever in doing that to Pakistan, whereas sadly, Pakistan still covets the 2/3 of Kashmir that India has, and therefore, sadly, the motivation is all on the other side. Secondly, India knows that a destabilized Pakistan is bad for us. Our focus is on the economic growth and prosperity of our own people. And we would like conditions and a local environment of peace and tranquility so that our people can be enabled to develop and to pull themselves out of poverty and rise to the opportunities of the 21st century in peace. We are not interested in fighting religious wars or other kinds of agendas. Pakistan, sadly, is full of organizations encouraged by the state which have a deeply sectarian agenda and which have avowedly declared war on India. We have no such organizations that have declared war on Pakistan. So I find it frankly slightly ridiculous to have the charges levied against India that we've just heard. I happen to know some of the staff in the couple of consulates we have on the border. Our other consulates, by the way, are in Herat and Mazar-e-Sharif, far from the Pakistan border. So I'm assuming the gentleman can only be referring to our consulates in Jalalabad and Kandahar. But neither of those has anything whatsoever to do with the Taliban or any version of the Taliban. For many years, we all know that the Taliban was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Pakistani ISI, And I think it would be slightly far-fetched to assume that Indian intelligence could suddenly take them over.
Now, of course, India has received a fair amount of criticism for its actions in Kashmir, especially when it comes to the clamping down of protests there. So Kashmir obviously is still a lingering problem for when it comes to India's management of it.
Oh, I agree with you entirely. I think we have a genuine challenge within our own domestic environment to deal with the disaffection of many people, including educated young people in Kashmir. On the other hand, what we try to do in dealing with such problems throughout our country is to tackle them through the process of democracy. There are free and fair elections in Kashmir. We have a freely elected Kashmiri Muslim chief minister and party in power, and they are responsive to their own voters. I would agree with you that there is a great deal that India could do better than it's done so far. But the fact that violence, sometimes instigated from across the border, arises does not mean that in any case this is an issue on which Pakistan has a locus standi. What India is trying to do, and I believe doing not as well as it could do, is to essentially win over its own people.
Let's get a quick call in from Saudi Arabia, from Mohammed. Mohammed, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Riz, for taking me on the air. I have a question with Mr. Shashi. Shashi, if I'm taking his name in the right pronunciation, I appreciate him calling for a peace in the Middle East by saying that Israel and Palestine should live together in peace. My question to him is, simultaneously, does he feel the same way for the Kashmiris who have been struggling for decades to get to the self-determination, and does he feel that the same way that India and Kashmir as a separate state should live in peace together, or India will continue supporting the puppet government?
Mohammed, bear with me. I'm going to ask Dr. Tharoor to stand by because we're going to take a very short break here, and we'll get to your an answer to your question in just a moment. When we return, more with Dr. Shashi Tharoor from India, including how does India deal with accusations that it might be a regional bully. We'll get right back to that. Welcome back. India is considered an emerging economic giant, but some accuse New Delhi of using its newfound clout to push its smaller neighbors around. How does India handle its position in the region and its stature around the world? Joining us to discuss that and other things is Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who represents the ruling Congress party in India's lower house of parliament. He's also a well-known journalist and author of the book The Elephant, the Tiger and the Cell Phone, Reflections on India, the Emerging 21st Century Power. Dr. Tharoor, we had that question just before the break, from Mohammed in Saudi Arabia. We've touched on Kashmir, but just a quick response to his question about how perhaps the Kashmiris might be compared to the Palestinians.
Well, I certainly don't accept that comparison. In fact, as far as we're concerned, Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, is an integral part of the Indian Union. It doesn't mean that everything is hunky-dory out there. There are genuine problems in recent weeks and months which need to be tackled, and need to be tackled politically as well as through efficient and effective law and order. And that's being done, and I think it certainly, as I said earlier, can be done better. But as far as we're concerned in India, we don't see a parallel. This is a part of our country for literally thousands of years of recorded history. And as far as we're concerned, what we owe to the Kashmiri people is what we owe to all Indians, which is a system that is democratic, that is fair, that is just, and that gives them the opportunity to really determine their own destiny and to work for their own future. The gentleman who asked the question spoke in terms of a puppet government. A puppet government, in any political terminology, is one that is imposed upon an unwilling electorate. This government was elected by a 65% turnout in the last elections, despite attempts by armed men, terrorists and militants inspired from across the border to intimidate voters and prevent them from voting. 65% of the electorate still went to vote. So we believe this government, the elected government in Jammu and Kashmir, enjoys the legitimacy of the ballot and is in the process of doing the best it can to resolve the problems there. I'm not going to pretend that we don't have an important challenge in winning over the hearts and minds of the youthful and disaffected protesters in Kashmir. But that does not in any way equate to the questioner's suggestion that this is some sort of Palestine situation.
Okay.
There is no desire on the part of Israel for Palestine to be part of Israel, whereas in the part of India, Kashmir already is a part of India.
Well, in the interest of getting as many questions as possible, let me get Swatan on the line from Sudan. Swatan, what would you like to ask?
Hello. Yeah, just can you ask my Pakistani counterparts who are saying that India is the breeding ground now, and they are operating in Afghanistan, which is very wrong. Can they answer that all the grievous attacks that have taken place in WTO, whether it is in London tube bomb blast, the Bombay carnage, the tail has been always found in Pakistan. The breeding ground of Taliban and the so-called terrorism, the breeding ground has been proved by Americans, British.
Okay, Swatan, Swatan, let me. I'm interrupting only because we've covered this now. I've got a lot to cover with Dr. Tharoor. So let me get one email question that came in from Eric Phillips from the Philippines. And if I could put this to you, please, Shashi. It's from the Philippines. India's regional considerations are limiting its international focus for now. What's your response to that?
Well, that's not entirely true, that there is an element of truth in that, and that we live in a tough neighborhood, and therefore dealing with our neighbors is indeed a priority for us. But India has always been conscious of its global responsibilities, and for the longest time, as you know, India has been amongst the top 1 or 2 contributors to UN peacekeeping operations. It's been an influential voice in the non-aligned movement and the Group of 77. It's been a principal player in bodies like the United Nations and now the G20. So India does continue to play a significant role on the global stage. We have just, we're looking forward in the next couple of months to being elected to a non-permanent seat in the Security Council of the UN. And as you know, we have been suggesting for some time that we feel ready to take on the responsibilities of a permanent seat at the United Nations as well. So though I see the questioner's concern that we are obviously affected by Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and so on, our immediate environment, we are not at all unconscious of our larger global role and global responsibility.
Let me ask you, why has there been such a problem with the Security Council seat? I mean, it seems logical for a country like India to be there. And then the other issue of the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, with India having the 3rd largest Muslim population in the world, it seems again a little disingenuous to be excluded.
Well, as far as the Security Council is concerned, Riz, it really has nothing to do with India. I don't believe that it's us that's the issue. The issue is that we can't be appointed a permanent member alone. There has to be a restructuring of the Council to accommodate powers that were left out in 1945. And as you know, there were many contenders. There's Japan, there's Germany, there's Brazil, and of course the need for Africa, which was still largely colonized in 1945, for Africa to be properly represented. So finding a formula that can accommodate the legitimate aspirations of countries from all continents and at the same time also expand the non-permanent membership, this has proved to be a bit problematic. We believe that when countries are able to come together and achieve the 2/3 strength they need in the General Assembly to get a formula passed, then I think India too, without any question, will find its rightful place, its permanent place on the Security Council. But it's so far been like a malady in which all the patients, I mean, all the doctors gather around the patient. They all agree on the diagnosis and they can't agree on the prescription. Everyone knows that the Security Council needs to be reformed because it reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945 and not of 2010.
Right.
But they just can't agree on how to go about it. And until that agreement comes, India will have to wait.
Now,
as for the OIC, India was actually invited to the founding conference of the OIC in 1969 at Rabat. Unfortunately, a couple of countries, and I think you're not surprised that one of them is Pakistan, objected to India, which at that point did not have either a Muslim president or a Muslim prime minister, being a founding member of the organization. And once we were asked to leave, we have chosen not to apply to come back. Indeed, we are not candidates for membership or even observer status in the OIC. We consider that any organization that purports to represent Muslims around the world and still leaves out 160 million Muslims in India cannot be taken seriously, and so we no longer take it seriously.
Of course, so many questions to ask about India, but I've only got a couple of minutes left. So let me ask you quickly about the race with China. It seems that India is taking some of the sort of leaves out of China's book and going for resources in Africa. It seems to be racing now for some kind of resource security as it wants sustained growth. Is there basically a competition now between India and China that may not be sustainable?
No, we believe the world is large enough and the resources are plentiful enough for there to be room for both India and China. We don't think we see ourselves in competition with China. We think there's tremendous complementarity in our economies. And when it comes to places like Africa and Latin America, the needs are sufficiently large and the opportunities are sufficiently wide that both India and China can indeed exercise their roles and satisfy the growth needs of their own peoples. Frankly, both India and China have one thing in common. We are focused on improving the lot of our own people, our own poor. We want to grow and develop to get back to the sort of economic strength we used to enjoy in the pre-colonial era. And that's where we're focused. We don't think we need to compete with each other. We can work together and work side by side to fulfill those objectives.
Now, less than a minute, and unfortunately a big question, but is India's sort of democracy holding it back when it comes to competing with a country like China? Does it need essentially a benevolent dictator or something very autocratic to set it on a stronger economic path?
No, democracy is fundamental to the Indian ethos. We are a plural society. We have every conceivable color, caste, creed. We have religions, we have languages, we have cuisines of all sorts coexisting. And the whole point about the Indian experiment is that you have this rich diversity and yet you can develop and grow. For us, democracy is the only way of preserving that diversity and ensuring that everybody in India feels they have an equal chance in the future of our society. Just 5 years ago, my party won an election which was essentially won by a woman of Catholic faith and Italian descent, who headed our party, and who then made way for a Sikh gentleman to be Prime Minister, and he was sworn in by a Muslim president in a country that's 82% Hindu. That is India, and democracy is our strength.
Dr. Tharoor, thank you so much. So many questions, including your hundreds of thousands of tweets and Twitter followers. We didn't even get onto that, but I hope to speak to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Riz. Bye-bye.
And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. Be sure to give us your feedback on topics we cover and post your questions and comments for our guests. On the next show, Wyclef Jean's presidential bid for Haiti's November 28th election has been met with both praise and criticism. We speak with the hip-hop mogul on his bid to become Haiti's next president. Be sure to tune in for that from me and the team. See you next time.